Hi, it's Professor Muldrow again, and I'm going to show you one way that Java does repetition, also known as loops in programming. The first type of loop we're going to look at is the most commonly used. It is called a for loop. Now, when you create a for loop in Java, you must start with the predefined keyword for, F-O-R. After the word for, you have parentheses, and inside these parentheses, you have to put three things separated by a semicolon. The first is some type of initialization. The second is some type of test condition. And the third one is an update step. The initialization is used to initialize a variable you use as a counter to count how many times you've done this loop. The test condition means that you will keep doing the loop as long as the condition is true. And the update step is to change the value of your counter so that you will eventually get out of the loop. As you can see, we also have a set of starting and ending curly brackets for the for loop and the statements. Now, whatever statements are within those curly brackets are the statements that will be repeated. Here's an example of a for loop. So here I have for, and in the parentheses, the first thing you see is I declare a variable, int I equals 1. That's my initialization. I is a variable. I'm declaring it and saying it equal to 1 to begin with. Then I have my condition, I less than or equal to 6. That means as long as I is less than or equal to 6, we stay in the loop and keep printing out the line, I am so smart. The last statement is the update. That's I++, which is shorthand for I equals I plus 1. So when you write I++, you're adding 1 to the variable I. And so that means the first time through the loop, I gets set to 1, and we check that against the condition. 1 is less than or equal to 6, so we'll display I am so smart, and then we will add 1 to I, so I becomes a 2. We then go back to the test condition. Well, 2 now is less than or equal to 6, so we'll print a second I am so smart. All the way up to until I becomes a 7. Now in this case, if I were a 6, 6 is not less than 6, but it is equal to 6. So when I has the value 6, this condition is true. And we print, I am so smart. But then when I becomes a 7, 7 is not less than or equal to 6. That means the condition is false, and we leave the loop. Here on this slide are the different comparison operators you can use. Less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. Here's another loop that will print the squares of 6 numbers from 1 to 6. As you can see, you could write that as 6 separate print statements, or you could put one print statement inside of a for loop that goes from 1 to 6, and you'll print 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, and so on. You can also count down in a loop as opposed to counting up. In this case, we have a for loop, and we initialize our counter variable I to 10 instead of 1. And as you can see, the update statement is I minus minus. That is shorthand for subtract 1 from I. Here's a word of the wise. If you're going to count down in a loop, your condition should not be less than or equal to, it should be greater than or equal to. Because obviously from this, as you can see from the output, we're doing 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, all the way down to 1. And then when our counter turns into a 0, we don't want to print the number anymore, we want to print blast off. And then that's the end of the program. So there you've seen in the PowerPoint slides examples of a loop that counts up and a loop that counts down. Now let me show you an example in Java code that does both. Here in the code, you can see that I've labeled part 1. I've set up a for loop that goes from 1. So here is my initialization. I use the variable x. So I'm initializing x to 1. That's done only one time. My condition is x less than or equal to 7. and my update is x plus plus. So I'm going to cube each value of x from 1 to 7. That means multiply it by itself 3 times. And then I will display value of x cubed equals the value you get. When I run that part, here's my output. As you can see, for that first part, I get 1 cubed is 1, 2 cubed is 8, 3 cubed is 27, all the way to 7 cubed is equal to 343. So in part 1, you see an example of a for loop that counts up. In part 2, I'm going to do a count down. As you can see, in this loop, I've initialized my counter to 7. Notice my condition is x greater than or equal to 1. And I'm doing greater than or equal to in this condition because I am counting down, because I have x minus minus. So I'm subtracting 1 from x each time I do this loop. And all I'm doing here is printing out each value of x cubed. Notice I'm using system out print instead of print ln. And then I'm putting a blank after the value. Here is the output for part 2 in the box. I start with 7. 7 cubed is 343, and then I display a space. And then 6 cubed is 216. Notice that is on the same line as 343. That is because I use system out print rather than print ln. And we continue from 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, all the way to a 1. And 1 cubed is 1. But then when I subtract 1 from 1, I get 0. And 0 is not greater than or equal to 1. And so that's when the loop ends. Here you have an example of a for loop that counts up and a for loop that counts down. If you have any questions, please send me an email at kmuldrow@lbcc.edu.